Ladies and gentlemen, imagine a world with no GPS, no cell service, no rescue helicopters, no second chances. Out there in the unforgiving wilderness, the rules were brutally simple. Adapt or die, the frontiersman. The knife was far more than a sharp edge, it was a lifeline. This single tool was arguably the most vital item in a frontiersman's kit. In the wild, where survival demanded constant adaptation, the knife was indispensable. It was used to skin animals for food and hide, carve wood for shelter and tools, prepare meals, make traps, cut rope, and even perform first aid in desperate moments. It served as both a delicate instrument and a brutal necessity. A well-crafted knife could shape an entire day of survival. When a tree needed stripping for kindling, the knife was there. When a snare needed bait, the knife helped prepare it. If clothing tore or gear broke, the knife helped fix it. The blade was even used to make other tools. A sharp stick could become a fishing spear, or a notch could be carved into wood to hold a pot over a fire. Its value extended beyond function. It was also symbolic. A knife meant capability, confidence, readiness. Frontiersmen often carried their knives in sheaths at their hips, easily accessible at all times. They maintained them with care, knowing a dull blade was a dangerous one. The relationship between a frontiersman and his knife was personal, like a trusted companion that never left his side. In times of confrontation, it became a last line of defense. In times of solitude, it was a constant, reliable presence. Whether he was building shelter in a snowstorm, cleaning a fresh kill under the blazing sun, or carving tools by firelight, the knife was always in his hand. It was the frontier's answer to multitasking, and no man dared enter the wild without one. In the wilderness, fire wasn't a luxury. It was a matter of life and death. And when matches were scarce or non-existent, frontiersmen turned to flint and steel as their reliable method for kindling a flame. This humble combination of stone and metal was one of the most critical survival tools ever carried across the frontier. With it, a man could produce fire anywhere, under nearly any condition, as long as he had dry tinder and the knowledge to use it. The process itself was deceptively simple. Striking a piece of carbon steel against a flint rock produced a shower of sparks. If those sparks landed on a well-prepared piece of char cloth or dry tinder, they could be coaxed into a flame. But it wasn't as easy as it sounds. It required skill, patience, and practice. Frontiersmen learned to shield their tinder from the wind, to angle the steel just right, and to recognize the subtle glow of an ember before it bloomed into life. Fire served countless purposes. It was warmth in the freezing cold. It was a signal to distant companions. It boiled water to make it safe, roasted meat to make it edible, and smoked hides to make them usable. It provided light when the sun disappeared, and safety when predators prowled the dark. Fire kept frostbite at bay, dried wet clothes, and offered psychological comfort in an otherwise hostile world. Carrying flint and steel was non-negotiable. Many frontiersmen wore small pouches around their necks or belts containing their fire-starting kits, which often included tinder, charred cloth, and a small flint shard. They learned to keep it dry, protect it from rain, and always have enough material to create fire in an emergency. Without fire, a frontiersman's chances of survival plummeted. He couldn't cook, couldn't stay warm, and couldn't protect himself from the cold or wild animals. That single spark, so small and fleeting, held the power to sustain life. Fire didn't just warm the body, it steadied the mind. And flint and steel were the tools that brought it into existence. The tomahawk or hatchet was more than just a chopping tool. It was a frontiersman's all-purpose workhorse, combining practicality, durability, and lethality in one compact instrument. In the wild, where every ounce of gear had to earn its place, this small axe played an outsized role in daily survival. Whether felling small trees, building shelters, butchering game, or defending against threats, the tomahawk was indispensable. Its size made it perfect for one-handed use, which allowed for greater mobility and efficiency. Frontiersmen could carry it easily on their belts or packs, always within arm's reach. It was light enough to swing quickly and heavy enough to pack a devastating impact. Unlike larger axes, which required more strength and space, the tomahawk could be used in tight quarters or while on the move, ideal for the unpredictable demands of the wilderness. For shelter building, it split logs, trimmed branches, and shaped stakes. For firewood, it chopped kindling and split larger pieces of wood. During hunts, it could assist in the messy but essential job of breaking down carcasses or clearing limbs for a makeshift blind. In close combat or defense situations, it served as a formidable weapon, sharp, fast, and deadly. In fact, many frontiersmen trained to throw their tomahawks with precision, giving them an advantage when hunting small game or in confrontations. But its uses didn't stop there. The back of the hatchet could be used as a hammer, for pounding stakes into the ground or crushing bones for marrow. The edge could shave wood for tinder or be used to spark flint if a knife wasn't available. In emergencies, the blade could cut through frozen hides, roots, or even light metal. A worn tomahawk was often a testament to its owner's experience. Chipped edges, stained handles, and worn grips told the story of countless miles, battles, and camps. Frontiersmen often customized their tomahawks, wrapping the handle with leather for grip or notching it for personal or spiritual reasons. Some even named them. After all, this tool was not just functional. It was an extension of the man himself, forged through necessity and tested by hardship. The tomahawk wasn't just a tool for survival. It was a tool for building a life out of the unforgiving wilderness. In the vast, untamed frontier, water wasn't always where you expected it to be, and when you found it, it wasn't always safe to drink. Dehydration could creep in fast, especially during long treks, intense labor, or under the blistering sun. That's why the water container, though often overlooked, was one of the most critical survival tools a frontiersman could carry. It wasn't just a canteen. It was life in liquid form, carried on his hip, ready at all times. Frontiersmen used a variety of water vessels depending on the materials available and the region they traveled. Some carried tin or copper canteens. Others fashioned containers from hollowed-out gourds or animal bladders. In extreme circumstances, even a tightly sealed leather pouch or bark container could serve the purpose. What mattered wasn't how it looked. It was that it held water securely and could be carried through the unpredictable terrain without leaking or breaking. The ability to store and transport water gave frontiersmen an enormous survival edge. Streams and rivers could be miles apart. A snow-covered ridge or a parched valley might not offer a drop. Being able to collect water while it was available and carry it for later use was not just convenient, it was strategic. It meant a man could keep moving, stay hydrated, and avoid being tied to a single water source. But there was another challenge: water safety. Clear water didn't always mean clean water. Stagnant ponds, beaver ponds, or runoff from animal trails could carry disease. That's why many frontiersmen learned to boil their water when possible, a process made easier by a durable water container that could handle heat or be poured into a pot over the fire. In colder climates, the container kept water from freezing during harsh nights. In the heat, it preserved every precious drop. In addition to drinking, water was needed for cooking, cleaning wounds, and sometimes even bartering. A full container could be the deciding factor in a successful hunt or a long journey across dry land. A seasoned frontiersman guarded his water supply with care. He scouted for refill points, learned how to read the land for signs of water, animal tracks, changes in vegetation, the distant sound of a trickling creek. But he also respected the fragility of that resource. One crack, one spill, one forgotten refill could lead to thirst that weakened the body and dulled the senses, both dangerous in the wild. The water container, humble in appearance, was a silent companion. It hung beside the knife and tomahawk, bouncing gently with each step, whispering a promise of endurance. In a world where nature gave no guarantees, having your own supply of water could mean the difference between pressing forward or perishing on the trail. In the heart of the wilderness, where danger lurked behind every tree and survival hung by a thread, the firearm stood as the great equalizer. For the frontiersman, it was more than a weapon. It was a provider, a protector, and a signal of independence. Whether facing down a charging bear, hunting elusive game, or warning off potential threats, a reliable firearm could mean the difference between starvation and sustenance, between life and death. The typical firearm carried by a frontiersman was a flintlock rifle or musket, later evolving into percussion cap rifles as technology advanced. These were long-barreled, single-shot weapons that required skill, patience, and maintenance. They weren't the rapid-fire tools of modern warfare, but in trained hands, they were devastatingly effective. A frontiersman's accuracy, timing, and confidence often reflected years of experience, honed through countless hunts, close calls, and practice sessions by firelight. Beyond protection, the firearm served a crucial role in providing food. Game was a constant need. Deer, elk, rabbits, and even birds were essential sources of protein and materials. The rifle allowed a man to reach distant targets, to take down prey too fast or too dangerous for traps or arrows. But ammunition was precious, and every shot had to count. Powder, lead, and flint weren't always easy to come by. So frontiersmen learned to cast their own bullets, carefully ration their supplies, and clean their guns with near-religious dedication. A firearm also had symbolic power. It was a declaration that the man who held it was self-reliant, ready to stake his claim, defend his land, and carve out his place in a world that respected only strength and resolve. During encounters with rival trappers, hostile tribes, or wild predators, the mere presence of a loaded rifle could alter outcomes without a trigger ever being pulled. Maintaining a firearm in the backcountry was an art. Moisture, dirt, and constant use could degrade performance quickly. Frontiersmen carried tools to clean and repair their weapons, oiling the barrel, checking the flint, tightening the lock. The gun was kept within arm's reach at all times, often slung across the shoulder or cradled in the crook of the arm, never far from the man's body. It became an extension of his instincts, an immediate response to a sudden rustle, a distant movement, or a snapping twig. In the darkest nights and wildest lands, when no help was coming and no second chances remained, the firearm stood silent but ready. It was both security and savior, and its presence offered a sense of control in a world ruled by chaos. Out in the unforgiving wilderness, where temperatures could plummet without warning and wild predators prowled the night, fire was more than warmth. It was survival incarnate. A frontiersman's fire-starting kit was his insurance policy against the cold, the dark, and the despair of isolation. It allowed him to harness one of nature's most powerful elements and bend it to his will. Without it, even the strongest man could quickly fall victim to exposure, illness, or predators that thrived in the shadows. A typical fire-starting kit of the era was simple, but every part of it served a critical purpose. At its core was the flint and steel, a time-tested method that required skill, patience, and practice. By striking the steel against the flint, the frontiersman created sparks hot enough to ignite char cloth or dry tinder. The char cloth, usually made by slowly burning linen or cotton in a controlled way, caught even the faintest spark and allowed it to smolder, providing a vital few seconds to breathe life into a flame. Beyond the flint and steel, many kits included dry tinder such as birch bark, pine shavings, or moss, all carefully kept in waterproof containers, sometimes crafted from horn, tin, or sealed leather. In wet climates or during long treks, it was critical to keep these materials dry. A rain-soaked bag or an unexpected dunk in a stream could render a fire kit useless unless it was well protected. Some frontiersmen carried magnifying lenses to start fires with sunlight, or small sulfur-tipped wooden splints that could ignite with less effort in damp conditions. But fire wasn't just for warmth. It was also used to cook food, boil water, ward off insects, keep dangerous animals at bay, and provide light during the long, black hours of night. The crackle of flames offered psychological comfort too, breaking the loneliness of the frontier and restoring a sense of control amid the chaos of the wild. For many, fire was ritual. Building it, feeding it, and protecting it became a rhythm of survival. It turned a barren clearing into a camp and made a hostile forest feel momentarily like home. Fire starting was a skill passed from one generation to the next, often learned young and refined over years. A seasoned frontiersman could build a flame in wind, rain, or snow with the materials he had on hand. He learned to recognize the best types of wood, to find dry kindling even under wet leaves, and to nurse a fragile spark into a roaring blaze. His fire-starting kit wasn't just a pouch of tools. It was a badge of knowledge, a symbol of his self-reliance, and a line drawn between life and death in a land that showed no mercy for the unprepared. To the modern eye, a needle and thread might seem trivial in the face of towering mountains, wild animals, and untamed forests. But for the frontiersman, a simple sewing kit was a lifeline, a small, unassuming bundle that quietly held his world together, stitch by vital stitch. In the wilderness, every piece of gear had to endure relentless wear and tear. There were no replacements, no outfitters waiting around the next bend. If something broke, it had to be fixed, immediately, efficiently, and often in harsh conditions. The sewing kit made that possible. Tucked away in a pouch or wrapped in cloth, a typical kit included a few heavy-duty needles, coarse thread, often waxed linen or sinew, and sometimes spare buttons, patches of leather or fabric, and awls for piercing thicker materials. These tools were indispensable when a boot seam gave out mid-hike, when a shirt sleeve tore on a thorn bush, or when a bedroll strap snapped under the weight of a load. Without repair, a ripped garment could let in freezing wind. A broken boot could slow a man down or even cripple him. Torn gear could compromise protection against rain, insects, and cold. The frontiersman knew that neglecting a small tear today could mean facing a serious problem tomorrow. So he learned to sew, not for style, but for survival. He could reinforce seams, mend holes, reattach fastenings, and even craft entirely new items from salvaged materials. His hands were calloused not only from axe work and rifle drills, but from countless hours of careful stitching under flickering firelight or in the shelter of a pine grove. But the sewing kit's value went even deeper. In dire moments, it became a tool of improvisation. Needles could be used to remove splinters or even sew up wounds in extreme cases. Thread could bind makeshift repairs on packs or tents. A piece of leather patch might become a crucial part of a trap or a bandage in an emergency. In short, the kit wasn't just about clothing. It was about resilience and adaptability. This tiny collection of tools taught a powerful lesson. Survival wasn't only about brute strength or firepower. It was also about foresight, self-sufficiency, and the wisdom to prepare for life's slow failures, not just its sudden dangers. In the silence of the forest, when the wind howled and every step forward wore down both man and gear, the sewing kit offered quiet strength. It held together not only the fabric of clothing and tools, but the fragile line that separated a functioning frontier life from disaster. In the vast, unforgiving frontier, where every ounce of energy counted and every meal was hard-earned, the cooking pot became the heart of the frontiersman's daily ritual. It wasn't just a piece of gear. It was a symbol of endurance, ingenuity, and comfort. More than any other tool, the pot turned raw, foraged ingredients into nourishment, and campfire flames into a shared human experience. Whether alone on the trail or surrounded by fellow travelers, a frontiersman's pot was his kitchen, his medicine cabinet, and often his only connection to warmth and routine. Typically made of cast iron or tin, these pots were built to withstand brutal conditions. They endured the open flame, were carried on horseback or strapped to packs, and weathered the bumps and jolts of daily travel. They were blackened by soot, dented from years of use, but they were never discarded. A well-seasoned pot could outlast gear far more expensive and complex because it was the centerpiece of survival. It simmered stews made from fresh game and dried beans, boiled water drawn from creeks and puddles, and brewed coffee that chased away the morning cold and the weariness of long days. But the pot's usefulness extended far beyond basic cooking. It could render fat from animals to make candles or waterproof leather. It could be used to melt snow or collect rainwater in dry seasons. It sterilized tools, boiled herbs into tonics, and sometimes served as an emergency wash basin or even a trap. If need be, it could be a loud noisemaker to scare off predators or serve as a last-ditch weapon. In the right hands, it was a multi-purpose tool of infinite value. Meals made in the pot didn't just feed the body, they kept the spirit alive. After grueling days of travel or bitter fights with weather and terrain, the bubbling sounds of a meal in the making brought an anchor of normalcy. The aroma of venison stew or wild onion broth cutting through the cold reminded men that they weren't just surviving, they were living. The act of stirring a pot, adding whatever ingredients one had managed to scrape together, and sharing it, even if just with oneself, was a moment of peace and humanity. Cleaning and maintaining the pot was part of the rhythm, too. A neglected pot could rust or become a breeding ground for illness. So it was scrubbed with sand or ashes, dried carefully, and stored in a place of respect. A seasoned frontiersman knew exactly how much fire his pot could take, how long it needed to cook hard beans, and how to layer ingredients to stretch flavor and fill hungry bellies with minimal resources. The cooking pot embodied the frontiersman's resourcefulness. It showed that survival wasn't always about the sharpest blade or the fastest shot. Sometimes, it was about having the means to make something from almost nothing, to find sustenance in scraps, and to create a bit of order in the chaos of the wild. In the raw and often merciless wilderness, where the next river could be days away and the last rain was a distant memory, water wasn't just a need. It was everything. The human body can survive weeks without food, but only days without water. That's why the frontiersman's canteen wasn't simply a container. It was a lifeline, a sacred vessel that carried the one resource no man could do without. It accompanied him through scorching plains, snow-laden trails, and dense, humid forests, always close at hand, always guarded like treasure. Canteens came in various forms, some crafted from metal, others from animal hides lined with pitch, and even wooden flasks sealed with beeswax or resin. Regardless of design, they were built to be tough, portable, and reliable. A leak, a crack, or a lost cork could spell disaster. That's why a seasoned frontiersman inspected his canteen constantly, kept it clean, and knew exactly how much water he had left at any given moment. But the canteen wasn't just for drinking on the move. It was an essential tool for planning. It dictated how far a man could travel in a day, how long he could remain on a ridge or in a valley, and whether he could pursue a game trail or had to break off in search of a spring. Every route was calculated around water sources, and every detour came with the silent question, do I have enough? This ever-present awareness became second nature, an instinct as sharp as any blade. Refilling the canteen, however, was never a matter of simply dipping it into the nearest stream. A frontiersman had to judge whether the water was clean, moving, and free of visible contamination. He might strain it through cloth, boil it over fire, or let sediment settle before drinking. Knowledge of natural filters, like sand beds or charcoal, and the locations of reliable springs often meant the difference between health and debilitating illness. Dysentery, parasites, and poisoned water claimed countless lives. The wise frontiersman treated every drop with care. Beyond quenching thirst, water had countless roles. It was needed to clean wounds, prepare food, soften leather, and cool hot metal. In moments of injury or fatigue, it revived and restored. A single canteen of water might help wash grit from a rifle barrel or soothe a horse in the heat. It might even save another life, a companion, a stranger, or an animal too weak to continue. The canteen taught discipline. It taught restraint. In moments of desperation, when lips were cracked and limbs weak, the temptation to gulp every drop could be overwhelming. But survival demanded control, measured sips, rationed gulps, and the constant search for the next source. It forced the frontiersmen to listen to the land, to read signs of nearby water, tracks in the soil, birds circling above, or the whisper of a stream beyond the trees. The canteen wasn't just filled with water, it was filled with strategy, foresight, and the will to endure. Fire. To the frontiersmen, it was more than a source of light and heat. It was survival distilled into flame. Without it, the wilderness became a cold, dark, and hostile place. With it, a man could fight back the night, cook his food, purify his water, warm his bones, and keep the creatures of the dark at bay. That's why his Firestarter, no matter how simple or primitive, was never far from reach. It was often the first thing packed and the last thing checked, because without fire, everything else became harder, or impossible. In an era before lighters and waterproof matches, the tools of fire were raw and elemental. Flint and steel were common, their sparks coaxed on a char cloth or dry tinder like cotton, bark, or fungi. Some frontiersmen used fire pistons or magnifying lenses, depending on the materials and sunlight available. Others carried carefully crafted tinderboxes, packed with dry moss and fatwood, wrapped in waxed leather to keep the contents safe from dampness. These items weren't conveniences. They were the result of hard-earned experience, painstaking preparation, and the bitter knowledge of what it meant to go without. Starting a fire in the wild was a skill earned by failure. Wet wood, wind, and cold fingers could turn a simple task into a desperate battle. A man might spend an hour sheltering a sputtering flame with his body, nursing it from spark to ember to blaze, knowing that without it, the long night ahead could bring frostbite, or worse. Fire gave him the power to dry soaked clothes, fend off predators, signal for help, and even craft tools by hardening spear tips or boiling water to soften hides. It also provided mental relief. The psychological comfort of a crackling fire was no small thing. It brought with it a sense of home, no matter how far from civilization a man had wandered. It gave him the courage to rest, to eat, to think. The flames offered rhythm and light in the chaos of the wild, a flickering reminder that he still had control, however fragile, over the forces of nature. But fire was also a responsibility. It had to be managed, watched, and extinguished properly. One careless ember could turn a forest into a death trap. A true frontiersman knew the balance, how to use fire as a tool, not a threat. He built fire pits shielded from wind, used stones to reflect heat back into his shelter, and always kept a stash of dry tinder tucked close to his body in case of rain. Fire-making wasn't just a trick. It was a discipline, one passed down in silence through generations of hardened survivors. These 7 essential survival tools weren't just objects. They were extensions of the frontiersman's will, his wisdom, and his grit. They speak to a time when survival wasn't a game or a thought experiment. It was a daily reality. There were no safety nets, no second chances. Out there, it was man versus wilderness, and only those who adapted, who learned to rely on the tools they could carry, the skills they could master, and the instincts they could sharpen, lived to see another dawn. We may not face the same wilds today, but the lessons remain. Preparedness, self-reliance, respect for the land. These tools, and the people who wielded them, remind us that survival is never guaranteed. It's earned, one fire, one drop of water, one sharpened blade at a time. And in that, the frontier lives on.